active learning is just engaging the students in the learning process, that they are the center of what you are doing in the classroom, that they have ownership over their learning, but they're also invested in what's going on. And then asking the question of how might we best learn and use the space that we are in to enhance that learning. So in an active learning classroom, it's really important that you're changing the way you think about teaching and not just what you're teaching. So how does the space enhance the learning that's going on and enhance the teaching, but also simultaneously, how are you empowering student voice? And I think that the most important question to ask when you're in an active learning environment is, how can I awaken the potential of my student and rethink the space as a tool to help them awaken their learning and their potential and ultimately just empower their voice? Well, when the student is at the center of it and they are actively involved in the process, there's this renewed sense of ownership and investment in what's going on, and the learning is just so much more successful but also authentic to the student. Well, when planning for the first day of activities, whether that was my first year or my second year, there were 3 things I really took into consideration. First, how can I build a community of deep and authentic relationships among my students? Second, how can I empower my students' voice to be heard in that classroom? And then third, how can I create this shared and safe space so that my students can take risks in their learning throughout the school year? Really involving the students in discovering the purpose and the essential agreements or rules for each part of the space. So whether that's furniture or different learning surfaces or the technology, having the students observe, establish a purpose, and establish the rules for those things together, especially in the K-12 space. And that way there's that shared understanding of the space and of the learning. But also it's really important to position the students as designers. And on day 1 for me, my students walked into a classroom and all the furniture was pushed aside and it was a blank slate. And we had to co-construct that space together and really design what kind of space is going to most empower us as learners as a classroom. And then also taking the time to try it out and reflect on what worked well and what didn't work well. And throughout that process then, we established a space in which the students understood the expectations, they understood their role in the classroom, and then they were able to support each other in the learning process. And since day 1, having laid that foundation of sharing the process and the creation, I found that my management is much stronger because my students are invested in that process. I think one of the most powerful activities or processes that we did as a class was to design different classroom arrangements. In response to the question, how might you best learn, I challenged my students the first week of school to work with somebody they might not have known prior to think about how can we arrange our space so that we can best learn. And they had to, on a personal whiteboard, draw out, map out the design of the classroom, give it a name, but then also write down and explain the purpose. And they pitched these ideas to each other, they got feedback from each other, and then they revised their designs. And ultimately, as a class, we came to a consensus of about 5 different classroom designs that we now use throughout the year. And the kids are so proud of those designs because I can refer to them by name of the designer or by the name the student gave them. So that was one really student-centered design thinking challenge and process. But another way to just encourage mobility, but also a sense of collaboration, was we played games with the furniture early on, and in a K-12 classroom, allowing students to explore the reality that the chair can spin or roll and the tables move. We actually did play some just team building games using the chairs and the tables in my classroom. Say the strongest response from parents in my classroom is just the mobility my kids can have. No longer are 10-year-old students sitting in one chair all day, and some of my students that fidget and move so much now have a safe way to actively get up, to move around, to work in different spaces of the classroom, and that's really allowing them to just be stronger thinkers and learners because they are utilizing the space and the mobility of the classroom. And parents just notice, kids are set up better for success in the classroom, that their individual needs are being met because of the flexibility and the mobility of the space. one resource that I have found and read, and it was a super quick read that just challenged me to think differently, was the book Redesigning Learning Spaces. And it was one I could sit down, read it in one night, but I left with this whole new thought on how can I best utilize my wall space, my floor space, the arrangement in my classroom. So that's one resource that I would recommend reading. My approach to design thinking in the classroom was to give students a challenge. And the first day, the challenge was we have no furniture set up in our room to be learning, and how can we create a space that will allow us to best learn. And my students, that was their only direction, was design a classroom that we can learn in. And then I positioned students in small partners or teams to design this space, to share their ideas, explain the purpose of the space they designed, and then get feedback from their peers and then change it and improve it. And then we actually tried out those different designs, and over the course of the first few weeks of school, we would try out the different creations of my students. And one of my favorite memories is we made one classroom arrangement that was designed, and the designer said, well, that looks a whole lot different than what I had thought it would. And it was just this powerful moment of saying sometimes what we envision doesn't always play out, but how can we learn from it? And in the process, I had students changing parts of my classroom that I had never considered and are so much more utilized and powerful by just moving a table from here to here, and all of a sudden it opens up that potential. Positioning my students in an active learning classroom has really positively impacted their well-being and their achievement, in the sense that my kids, when asked, what do you like most about our space, is just that they can move, that they can fidget. And working with younger students, a lot of times they just need to have that freedom to move around, to get up and to be at the center of what's going on. And ultimately too, it's affected their achievement because we can so quickly rearrange our space into a way that will best support what kind of learning we're doing at that moment. So whether that is partner work, group work, presentations, discussions, splitting the classroom and having two separate lessons going on, or differentiating student need and having kids that need more support up at front and kids that are ready for a challenge working in teams in a different part of the room, really then allows each student's need to be met and ultimately having more successful learning going on in the classroom. The environment really does enhance student learning because every part of the classroom is a place where learning can occur, whether that's the walls, on a chair, on the floor, at a table. And I guess the best way that I know that it's worked is I've asked my kids and their response is yes, like this has made a difference. I can focus better. We can rearrange into different learning spaces so that what I'm doing, I can really collaborate, or I can think individually or think with a partner. So ultimately, changing the way that I think and saying the space is another essential part of my classroom, and the way that we use it really can set students up for success as learners, as teachers, as collaborators, and ultimately we just create a shared space in which the students at the center and the learning is actively happening around them. So the first year I had this furniture with my students, it was also new for me, and so I really was a learner alongside of my students, and we explored and collaborated together. And in the second year, I found that I was coming in with a lot of knowledge and experiences based on my prior year teaching that the kids that were new to my class didn't have, and so I had to step back as the teacher and let my students really explore and develop this new knowledge that I had started to develop priorly. But what I found is that my new set of students were also bringing in ideas that we hadn't learned or explored the year before. And so really year to year, each set of students is so unique. They have such different needs that allowing them the opportunity to discover, explore, and then ultimately share their ideas will lead to new discoveries each year. And as a teacher, listening to my students that they are the ones learning in the space and the space needs to reflect their needs allowed me to better teach and empower them as students.